I mean, most of my time was thinking that way. I wasn't very popular in school, so so I had to change that. It doesn't solve everything. It's not everything. Also now because of health issues, full desire has gone to a zero. I couldn't perform, and I'm not interested in it. But I still, my number one prevention to start off with is I don't associate with children. I don't, if I work with somebody and they have children, I associate with them at work. I'm not going to go over and hang out at their house. I'm uncomfortable around kids. So,
And that's good that you won't be hanging around children.
Now, we are about to watch the parole hearing for a man whose initial crime was committed in 1988. But believe me, he hasn't been serving his 100-year sentence since that time. He was actually granted parole in 1995, and since then has been revoked 9 times. Okay, so if he's granted today, it will be his 10th chance at parole. Now, what's also interesting about this case is that he initially escaped prison for his initial sentence. So that like 8-year sentence that he served about was including the reprimand for actually escaping and almost making it to the Mexico border. So I'll unpack it with those details of his escape as well at the end. But for now, let's jump in.
My name is Kelly Perry. I'm a hearing officer with the Board of Pardons and Parole. Do you mind scooting up a little bit? And I'll be conducting your hearing today. As this is an official proceeding, I do need to swear you in. So if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes,
Did you receive 7 days written notice of today's hearing?
yes,
Did you receive your blue disclosure packet?
yes,
And did you have a chance to review that?
yes,
Do you feel prepared to go forward with today's hearing?
yes.
Are there any errors or corrections I should know about in that blue disclosure packet before we begin today?
The only thing that I would say for a correction is apparently with the interviewing officer from SOTP, uh, either didn't know or wasn't, we had a miscommunication about when I told him I've done the program twice. The first time I did at SSD, the second time I did it was at Nuke in the Ogden Halfway House. And apparently he doesn't understand that they used to have inpatient programs in the halfway houses because his report all talked about just aftercare that I'd done in the community, did not mention me completing the program in the halfway house as well.
Any other errors or comments, sir?
No, that's the only one.
Okay, sir. So just to kind of tell you how today's going to go, we are going to go over that report. So you are welcome to reiterate that, but we'll go over procedurally how we got to this hearing. I'll ask you for any comments about your offenses. I'm not going to go over them individually, but ask you for any comments. We'll go over any background questions I have, institutional behavior and programming, if you were released, what that would look like. And then at the end of the hearing, if you have further questions or comments, let me know, okay? So it looks like a rehearing occurred after an evidentiary hearing. A rehearing was ordered for now with a sex offender treatment memo. It was noted that you were expected to complete sex offender treatment as evaluated to be appropriate prior to this hearing. Does that sound procedurally correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any comments about your offenses for which you are currently incarcerated?
No.
Do you have any comments about your risks of why they occurred?
I think the biggest issue was the people I was hanging around with. The fact that they were all felons, you know. And so what I need to do going forward is need to break that. I've done such great time in prison. Everybody I know is from prison. I don't know people on the streets anymore, but I need to just make a clean break from that and create new, appropriate relationships. Uh, why I don't I hate to even bring this up, but I've started attending church here. I've been baptized while I've been here. And those are the kind of people that I want to associate with because they're going to be uplifting. They're going to help keep me on the straight and narrow. And there's not going to be, I'm not going to run into the criminal thinking. You can't meet good people in bars, not that I can go to bars anyway, but I mean, you wouldn't want to go there to meet good people. So I figure the dealing with the congregation, at least initially, and some mental health counseling moving forward, be to my best interest.
I mean, sorry, and I want to make sure I'm understanding you, right? Um, I think there are people who go to bars that there is nothing wrong with them. You have DUIs, so
Yeah.
I don't think you should be going to bars.
Right.
But and obviously you have the sex offense. What do you think your risk was in regarding the sex offense?
Sex offense, I'd say my risk is relatively slow. I mean, considering from 1988 to date, there have been no new sex offenses. I think that speaks volumes, and that's after I completed the program here at SSD. I worked with Dr. Blakelock, and he was a tough guy to please. And he really made you think. And that's where I gained my greatest, changing my thinking, changing my behaviors, and
What did you change specifically?
specifically just the way I thought. Growing up with the environment I grew up in, you know, being sexually assaulted by my brothers, I had a lot of distorted thinking and a bunch of irrational beliefs. And he challenged us to go back in and change that. I remembered in one of our groups, you know, one of the things he asked us, he says, "What makes you different?" And, and there was it was a pretty good sized group at that time. I think there were 13 of us in there at that time. And he went around and asked each one of us, "What makes you different from anybody else out on the street?" And one guy said, "Oh, well, I had a low self-esteem." He says, "I have a low self-esteem. I've never sexually assaulted anybody." And another guy went on that, I was viewing pornography. He says there's millions of people that view pornography every day and they don't go out and sexually assault someone. What makes you different? You know? So, and as everybody went around, he shot him down on it. He says, everybody's got those problems. What makes you guys different? Why did you choose to sexually offend? And so I looked at Doc. I said, "Look, give me a week." I says, "I'll come back." And I says, "I've got to think about this." I said, "That's a really good question." And so I applied myself, and throughout the week, I thought about it, and every time I come up, well, it was this. Well, no, other people have that issue. Why am I different? And I finally figured it out. And so the next week I went back into group. I told him I had an issue. We talked about it. He said, "Well, what was it?" I said, "It's that question you asked last week." He said, "What question?" I said, "Well, and what makes us different?" He says, "You have an answer?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, what is it?" I said, "I was preoccupied with sexual thoughts and fantasies. I mean, that was my entire life. Part of that led up to having that irrational belief was, one, the sexual assault by my brothers. Two, when I got into high school, everybody in the locker room was talking about, well, they're having sex with this girl, that girl, and whatever. And I thought, well, there must be something wrong with me because I'm not having all this, not recognizing that they're lying just the same, but I bought into it. And so growing up with that, having sexual fantasies constantly, thinking, and so that led into the deviancy. And then it was a long lifeline of that deviancy before I finally acted out the first time.
And sorry, I'm making notes of everything you're saying. I don't want you to think I'm not listening, okay?
Yeah, no, it's not okay.
No, I'm making notes of everything you're saying. I just want you to know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Doc, so at that time, Dr. Sanchez was over the program. And with him was, if you had a child offense, your number one risk offense had to be a deviant sexual attraction to children. And so then he went around and asked everybody in the group, he says, out of all you guys, how many do you think that should be a risk factor for you guys? And only a couple of guys raised their hands. He says, if it wasn't for Dr. Sanchez having this guideline that you have to follow, he says that should be every one of yours number one risk factor. And he says, and in all the years I've been doing sex offender therapy, he says nobody has ever stated that as being a risk factor. And it was. I mean, most of my time was thinking that way. I wasn't very popular in school. So I had to change that. It doesn't solve everything. It's not everything. Also now because of health issues, sexual desire has gone to a 0. You know, I couldn't sexually perform and I'm not interested in it. But I still, you know, my number one prevention to start off with is I don't associate with children. You know, I don't, if I work with somebody and they have children, I associate with them at work. I'm not going to go over and hang out at their house. I'm uncomfortable around kids. So, you know,
And that's good that you won't be hanging around children. I do want to make sure I get to the sex offender status report. It provided a risk level of average risk. It said that you had completed the sex offender treatment program in 2005. And then it said community treatment, which you talked about. It noted that your current parole violations remain a concern and that your current recidivism scores place him in the average risk. It said additionally that you were an unfavorable candidate for treatment at this time, as he has made his intentions clear to not engage in or complete sex offender treatment while in the prison.
yeah, and that's why
Why is that?
I don't see where I would gain anything more if I've completed the program twice. I haven't committed a sex offense since 88. I think that speaks volumes about where my risk assessment should be. Why his viewpoint is that I'm not a good candidate for sex offender therapies. I says I didn't want to do the program here, you know, because that was the first question he asked me. He said, "Do you want to do the program here?" And I told him no, and I explained why. And then that was basically the end of our interview. And then he just pulled everything out of my jacket from there.
So are you saying you will not do sex offender treatment?
Not why I'm here, no,
So even if the
At-
board were to order it again with the rehearing, you will not do it?
no. If you want to order, which is mandatory by law, the aftercare I have to do that. But I'm not going to redo an entire program a third time.
Sir, and I understand your point that you have not been committed of a sex offense, a new sex offense. But the report talked about your behavior on your 9th parole, right? Where you were unsuccessfully discharged from sex offender treatment, that you had 4 cell phones, that you had numerous videos of young adult males engaging in sexual relations, that you had admitted to using meth. I mean, this is obviously concerning behavior, right? On your last parole.
Yeah, well, the cell phones, I had 2 cell phones. The other belonged to the guy that lived next door that totaled my car and was incarcerated at the time. And I held on to his property. I had most of it in a small storage unit, what I could fit in there. The other cell phones were his. I was using one of his because my cell phone service had stopped down. You know, I didn't tell my parole officer about it. I told the POs that showed up that was searching. And I don't know if that information got passed on to my parole officer or not. I have no idea. But I had 2 cell phones.
Why did you have 2?
One was a work phone. Okay, that was used specifically so because I work from home and Maximus Federal, they have a program because you see basically if I was sitting at a desk at Maximus Federal, my screen would look like would look like what would you find on my screen. But there's a program, you punch into that and it would give you a number and it gives you a time frame that you have to be logged in so many seconds. And if you don't log in, then you have to wait for the next number to come up and then punch that number in to be able to log into their system. So that one was used strictly for work. The other one I had, which was a plus phone, there was 2 of them. The one I was using and then mine that was turned off. And on my list that I got back from AT&P, that phone wasn't on the list. So I don't know if they didn't find it or if it got misplaced or what. And then there was 2 Apple phones. And I didn't see the Apple phone on there and I didn't see.
So are you saying that the stuff that so why did you not complete sex offender treatment on your last parole? Because it says you were unsuccessfully discharged.
Okay, I was going to it. The therapist I had, we were doing it over the phone and we had some issues about her getting paid. I changed from my Medicaid from one to another, and I gave her all the numbers. I gave her photocopies of front and backs of my cards and everything. She's saying I'm not paying her, and that's in the report from to AP&P. She says for a year she never got paid, and I just don't believe it. So we had some issues there. So she just discharged me when I come back in. Then she discharged me as incomplete and wrote a whole bunch of nasty stuff.
That's
So I done everything I could to get her paid if she wasn't getting paid. And I go through these really crazy mood swings. So that's why I wanted.
Are you currently taking any mental health medication?
Not here, no. The last time they put me on some stuff here, it made me pretty violent. You know, I was at the drop of a hat, I'd be wanting to fight everybody. So I got back off of it. And because of the prison environment, there's a lot of restrictions on what they can and cannot give you.
Okay. All right. So in regards to your board packet, I showed that if you are paroled, you'd like to go to a halfway house and work at a call center. Is that still the plan, sir?
Yeah, that's what I'd have to do.
Okay.
And at least until I could get my retirement started. And even then, I'm still going to have to work,
Okay.
part-time. I have completed, I didn't bring my certificates with me, but you can probably see it. I did get the career builders certificate on that. I got the interpretership completed. I've done the enduring skills, which is a lot of the work related skills that, personal, interpersonal skills completed. The only thing I haven't been able to take the final exam on that because it's missing on the notebooks. And I've notified the notebook people that, hey, I need this put in there. I'm also working on the master plan. I'm also working on electrical, plumbing, and HVAC.
All right, sir, those are all of my questions. From here, I'm a hearing officer. I make recommendations. The board ultimately decides. They're made up of 5 members. 3 of them have to come to one decision. That's the decision of the board. Should get that in writing within 2 to 4 weeks for you.
Yeah.
Do you have-
Especially this time of the year. Got a lot of holidays coming up, so.
Do you have any closing comments or questions for myself or for the board, sir?
Nope, that'll do it.
Well, I appreciate you attending this hearing. We'll go ahead and conclude. Thank you.
All right, I'm glad to tell you that they denied parole and he won't have another chance at a hearing for 2 more years. And it's like, wow, about time. Is that, 9 revocations. How do you not get an habitual offender and just lock him up forever? It's mind-boggling to me. And like I said, I'm going to share with you the reports of when he escaped prison. So, and what happened there, I think it's fascinating. Listen to this. So the prisons were overflowing in Utah, even back then in the late 80s, 90s. So what they were doing is they were handing off their prisoners to privately owned jails in Texas, and paying them $37.50 a day. If you don't think this was like, just another way for everybody to make money on each other, okay? In 1995, when he escaped, minimum wage, I looked this up, was $4.25 an hour. And they're paying $37.50 a day to house these inmates. Anyways, that's a different point. He escaped, right? And it was like 15 days later, they caught him in Louisiana. And they only caught him because he was arrested in Louisiana for stealing a car. So he was in jail, and Utah was calling all the jails in all the bordering states, and they found him. I'll read through you of how because it was a pretty crazy story in itself. But let's just unpack this first and then go through the different revocation history that he had. And thank you, Sir Richard, for making all of this possible in terms of the research and the spreadsheets and the whole thing. So this is what he does. He's quite an expert at these parole hearings by now because he's done so many of them, right? And it's interesting because I think it gives us insight, especially a unique insight into what it's like at these sex offender programs and how they all get taught and learn how to say things. And he goes on by kind of repeating by memorization what the instructor says. And the instructor goes around and says, well, you're blaming it on this, but we don't all go do this to a child. You're blaming it on this, but people normal who have those problems don't go and do this to a child. And it's quite interesting that he said that because that's what our chat is always saying, like where I was like, well, I've done this for, I was addicted to this and I never did that to a child. We say the same thing. So it was nice to hear that. But you're waiting for it to get to the point. And then his primary point, he says, well, my brother did this to me, and then also I was in high school and all the guys in the locker room were saying they were sleeping with all these girls and I wasn't. They were just lying. I didn't know that, but that really messed me up. I thought, and because of that, I did this to a child. It's like, what? Really? Wow. Huh. So, I mean, I guess every kid who wasn't macking it in high school just becomes a deviant, right? What? Like, oh my God, he still learned nothing. And then when it goes, to him talking about trying to talk through why he had 4 cell phones and why he has content on his phone with Young and why he has, and he goes through this, they call it gaslighting thing without any ending. He never even concludes. Remember, he would have had a lot of time to try to come up with a story or an excuse. And this just goes to show how his mind works. Really, many felons' minds work. He couldn't even come to conclusion of his story. He went on this word salad thing about phones and really just tailed off into nothingness. It never concluded. He never actually made up a reason. It's just, I think it's fascinating in a way. And Kelly does such a great job interviewing. She didn't even fight him on the fact that he had 4 phones. Okay, well, you had 2 phones then. So tell us why you had a second phone. And he's well, with work, and then he forgets. I think he starts talking about having 4 phones, and his buddy totaled his car, and we see this all the time. Word salad gaslighting. So this is 10/31, 1995 is his first time he's paroled for his initial crime, right? And the only reason he even got so much time because again his initial offense was in 80. What was it in 80? Let's see here. 88 was when he was convicted initially. He was released 2000. Well, I don't know. It shows here that he's released in 95. I don't know. He has a rescission hearing in 96, it shows. Then his parole is granted in 2006. Then he has a violation hearing. So he lasts a full year because he violates in 2007. It seems he has parole in 2009, a warrant for his arrest in 2012, right? Then again, a violation in 2015, violation in 2017, violation in 2019, another, I think, violation in 2019. He gets released in 2020, gets arrested 2021, so he has another violation. I mean, as you can see, it just goes on and on and on and on, and I don't even think that's all of it. But let's go to his prison escape because I think this is quite interesting. So it starts off with this article written in 1995. Utahs can't escape paying for escapees. So this even gets attention because while the inmates escaped, Utah was still paying the $37.50 to this Texas private prison, and they thought that was unfair because it's like, wait a minute, they escaped your jail and you're still charging us for an inmate that you're not taking care of. So that's quite an interesting article, right? Utah taxpayers will continue to pay operators of privately run Texas prison to house 2 Utah inmates even while the duo is on the lam. Right? If it wasn't taxpayer dollar related, maybe no one talks about this. Who cares that one was a murderer and one did this to children? Utah pays Dove Development $37.50 per day for each of the 100 inmates sent to its Crystal City, Texas prison in July to ease crowded conditions in Utah's prison. Scott Carver, Deputy Director of Institutional Operation, said even though the inmates aren't in custody, Utah still pays Dove for their care. Dove, however, must pay for the cost of searching for the inmates. Okay, well, at least that. But still, why wouldn't Utah pay? But anyways, who now face felony charges in Texas. 3 inmates escaped Saturday while painting the lobby of the private detention center. One of the inmates, James Brown, was found hiding in a brush a few hours later, and Carver said he was very happy to be back in custody. He traveled about 11 miles to get 4 miles from the facility, Carver said, while outside the prison's walls. Brown confronted rattlesnakes, was treed by wild pigs, and so he's climbing up a tree because wild pigs are trying to get to him. It's actually quite funny, this guy's escape experience. And from his knees to his feet, it looked like he'd been beaten with wire brush because of the cactus. So he did not have a good experience. But the other two, they got out. And it's interesting that they ditched their buddy, huh? So they actually escaped for like 10 days and he didn't. And they all escaped at the same time. He was cussing the desert and threatening to sue when officials located him. Carver said Brown also reportedly offered to let other prisoners know how unforgiving the Texas desert can be if others are considering escape. The other 2 escapees, convicted wife killer Donald Allen Noble and convicted child, who we just saw his parole hearing, are still at large. Officials say Noble is somewhat of a survivalist and may be more well suited than others to survive Texas' brutal deserts. Correction Director Lane McCotter and Dove officials told him they believed that they had the pier boxed in a 20 square mile area of the desert. The men ran different directions when they fled the lobby of the building, but Carver said one sighting of 2 inmates walking along railroad tracks had been reported. Brown, now in Zavala County Jail, faces escape charges, blah, blah, blah. So they weren't boxed in a 20 square mile radius because they made it to Louisiana, and that's where we're going to go to part 2. So now this is November 3rd, 1995, while the last article was written October 18th, 1995. 2 Utah inmates who escaped from private prison facility in Texas were arrested in Louisiana, good old Louisiana, Wednesday afternoon for car theft. Utah correction officials got wind that the pair had been arrested somewhere in Louisiana, but weren't sure if police there knew they had 2 dangerous felons in their custody. So, local officials spent hours calling every county jail in Louisiana and said correction spokesman Jack Ford, as it turns out, convicted murderer Donald Allen Noble and convicted child Broden were in jail at Lake Charles, Louisiana. Imagine if they had somehow bonded out or something. They're just horrible criminals. It's like, could you imagine if you are facing life in prison and you make it all the way to Louisiana, would you even allow yourself to get put in jail? But I guess you do, hoping you'll bond out. They were arraigned Thursday morning on charges of resisting arrest, possession of a stolen vehicle, possession of stolen property, switching license plates on a motor vehicle. They were booked into jail under the names Tracy Nilsson and James Hutchinson. That's great. The pair was sent to Crystal City, Texas, with 98 other prisoners to ease Utah's crowded prison system and escape authentic lobby. And so even with his escape charges, and this happened in 1995, he was still paroled. I mean, he was still paroled, even with this additional escape charge. It's just pretty amazing, huh? It's hard to imagine when you successfully escape and make it all the way to another state that you would then get caught so quickly. It's like, are there not other ways that? But these prisoners, they're just not. They're so impulsive, and there's, as you can see, they're not quite wired the same way. And I'm happy that he's locked up. With that, I'll let you go.
Went around and asked each one of us, what makes you different from anybody else out on the street? And one guy says, oh, well, I had a low self-esteem. He says, I have a low self-esteem. I've never sexually assaulted anybody. And another guy went on that, I was viewing pornography. He says there's millions of people that view pornography every day and they don't go out and sexually assault someone. What makes you different? So, and as everybody went around, he shot him down on it. He says, everybody's got those problems. What makes you guys different?